Welcome to Means of Grace, a podcast produced by the Western North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church.
I'm Luke Edwards, Associate Director of Church Development for the Western North Carolina Conference. In today's episode, we're talking about rural food systems and how churches can make an impact on our communities in economic and environmental ways. We talk with Jaimie McGirt of Resourceful Communities, which focuses on supporting a network of community groups, faith-based organizations, small towns, and resource providers in environmental stewardship, social justice, and sustainable economic development across North Carolina. And we talk with Bob Sturge, pastor of Mill Grove United Methodist in Midland, North Carolina, where he and his congregation have been encouraging the missional and evangelistic impact of predominantly rural congregations by partnering with local farmers to provide beef for neighboring food ministries and dinner churches. You should have seen the podcast team's faces on Zoom when I told them I wanted to do an episode about cows on the conference podcast. But as you'll hear, our rural Methodist churches in North Carolina are doing incredible work with their food systems, and perhaps your church could too. Friends, here are Jaimie McGirt and Bob Sturge. Bob, Jaimie, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Luke. Good to be here.
Thanks, Luke. Yes, good to be here.
So, Jaimie, let's start with you. Can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about Resourceful Communities and your role there?
Sure. So my name is Jaimie McGirt. I'm a faith and food coordinator with Resourceful Communities. We're a program of the Conservation Fund, which is a national nonprofit or environmental organization. We're working in 50 states since 1985, and we're redefining conservation solutions that protect nature and create jobs at the same time. Resourceful Communities being a program of the Conservation Fund, we specifically support grassroots organizations and churches in rural communities that across rural North Carolina are creating long-lasting impacts through efforts like environmental conservation, community economic development, and social equity. Within the Faith and Food Initiative specifically, I support rural United Methodist pastors and lay leaders with their new or existing food ministries. A lot of these pastors and leaders are trying to reimagine their food ministries in a way that supports their local economies and communities they serve in meaningful ways.
Awesome. And can you just tell us a little bit about what your role there looks like and how you've been involved with the organization?
Sure. So within the Faith and Food Initiative and supporting pastors and lay leaders, that support comes in three forms. We provide free technical assistance, and sometimes this looks like one-on-one coaching or group coaching with those pastors and lay leaders to either develop new ministries in response to challenges in their community related to food security, or sometimes kind of reshaping or adapting their existing food ministries. With small grants, we're able to support rural United Methodist churches generously through the Duke Endowment, with small grants up to $15,000 to support these kind of food ministries that deeply engage the church and residents together and support the local food economy. And then lastly, we provide traditionally before COVID network convenings, a way to get peers working together, meeting one another, and really exchanging the expertise and resources that they all hold. We believe the strength and capacity is really within our network across the state. It's not in each of us that work for Resourceful Communities. So we use those three approaches: technical assistance, small grants, and network convenings to support grassroots leaders and church leaders across the state. Of course, right now I'm doing that all remotely from home.
Bob, can you introduce yourself and your church and tell us a little bit about My Father's Cows?
Love to. Been a Methodist pastor for 45 years. Okay. Started when I was 4 years old. That makes me 49. So military. I was been a military chaplain for a number of years, quite a while. and more recently, actually taught school and kind of a bivocational scenario. And in that capacity, I took appointment with a small, I hesitate to call them a rural church. I call them a urban church. And for me, the term urban designates the fact that they're kind of culturally rural and socially rural, but they are 5 miles off the Charlotte Beltway, which means there's a lot of development pressure and people moving in. And so it's kind of a time between times. The church is Mill Grove. It's in Cabarrus County, again, in the greater metro area. And I'm in my 9th year there. And in the context of being there, we just had a variety of discussions, and it kind of centered on what could we do that's unique to the kingdom and just promoting the kingdom. And the answer came fairly easily, and that is raise cows. And we have some cattle farmers in the church, and our lay leader in particular was very instrumental and essentially allowed us access to what for him was a second farm. So we have a herd of cows. And I have said to many folk, I wonder how many Methodist churches in America have a herd of cows, but we have our own herd. And but then we've also networked with other farmers, and we buy cows. Our cows are donated to us, but just kind of locally networking with farmers. And it's in terms of distribution, it's gone through some stages initially, and we're still doing this. We basically have supplied beef to nonprofit dining situations like men's shelters, drug rehab, wherever there's a ministry that's serving people meals on a daily basis. That's a great fit for us because we just were able to upscale their menu, and it's just a good fit. More recently, and this is with you, Luke, we've been talking and engaging more with the dinner church program, where local congregations can use the beef as well. So it's been a lot of fun, and we've been blessed. And it just seems like every time we turn around that we're gifted in some way, and we're just very excited about it.
Jaimie, overall hope for this podcast is that our listeners will kind of come away understanding rural food systems better and how churches can get involved in rural food systems. Could you tell us what some of the most pressing issues y'all are seeing in regards to rural food systems?
I really loved thinking deeply about this prior to joining today. I was thinking, agriculture has long been considered the backbone of rural communities, and rural food systems, they've been suffering well before 2020, but COVID-19 really feels like it was the straw that broke the camel's back when we're talking about rural food systems. But before COVID, I might have said that some of the largest challenges were development, specifically Black land loss, which has been rampant in Black communities, not just in North Carolina, but across, especially the South. The shift from small farm systems to commodity agriculture systems, which have a greater toll on the environment, on human labor forces, and just, it seems like a repeated environmental disaster, like onslaught we've experienced with recent hurricanes in at least Eastern North Carolina. But with 2020, I feel like, and I say it was the straw that broke the camel's back because it really revealed all of these challenges that were existing in rural food systems, kind of below the surface of the water, the real bulk of the iceberg. Particularly, I think it's revealed a huge challenge of labor inequality. It's largely affected the Latinx population, but maybe more notably and more relevant to our time is both shortages and the surplus of food due to the national supply chain just crashing, kind of beginning March and going through the summer. What we saw were farmers and suppliers scrambling to find a home for their products. And when this was a national scale system, with products in rural communities, being shipped out. The communities where that food was grown didn't have that food as a resource when food was in short supply, but neither did the communities suddenly that were used to receiving these supplies. And so that's where we saw shortages nationally, but farmers were still producing, the land was still productive, animals were still productive. And so there was this oversupply period. And yet we also saw that school kids being isolated at home were not receiving the lunches they typically did. So, this shortage and surplus due to the national supply chain kind of crashing down was a huge issue. And I think it's reflective of what's been going on for a long time, which is missed economic opportunity in agricultural and specifically rural agricultural communities. So much capital and energy is just flowing out of rural communities, and that's human capital, natural resources, because the food's being produced there and it's not staying there. And yet there's this, I know there's this conversation about like the unraveling of rural America's social fabric, people leaving rural communities. And I'm sure Bob could speak to that, being a somewhat rural pastor, but, churches have really seen this, rural churches have seen this decline in membership, and rural communities generally have seen a decline in population and a decline in industry. What strikes me in my work is that I don't think rural communities are lacking people, and they're certainly not lacking innovative and creative people. Those people, kind of like Bob, are there in our rural communities. I really think it's an issue of investment, where businesses and institutions are investing their money and it not being with local farmers, local aggregators. And it comes right down to, you and I, where we're spending our money. So I think there's so much economic opportunity when we think about, hyper localizing our food economies and investing in the farmers that are producing food so that food can stay in our communities and their revenue is staying in our communities. And I have a little statistic here. And this comes from the North Carolina Cooperative Extension data. If 25 people spent $50 a month on local food from a farmer, then that's $1,250 a month, or $15,000 a year. For perspective, $15,000 is about what is more than half of what 74% of farmers make in 1 year. Wow. So it makes a really big difference if we start to think about where our money is going and what could be possible for farmers and food systems. If the individual, if businesses, if churches in that kind of institution pot are really investing in local food systems.
Bob, what do you think, hearing Jaimie's comments, how does that resonate with you and what you've seen with rural food systems through your work with My Father's Cows? What have you learned about cattle farmers in particular and about the issues that are facing them?
Being led to cattle farming has been a particular blessing, because in the measure of agriculture, cattle farming is not a huge industry in North Carolina. Okay. So it doesn't have a high corporate structure to it. It tends to be more of a family farm thing, or someone has a few cows. There are large commercial cattle farmers out there, but this is not Texas or Oklahoma. This is on a smaller scale. So it makes it more relational in terms of acquiring cattle. So that's a good choice for us anyway. I think the ingredient of the church, and I identify with the thought that, rural churches have kind of a struggling with a sense of identity right now. And I just want to encourage rural churches that, again, we've all got a role to play in the kingdom, and we all bring a unique involvement to ministry. And any rural church that has a heart for mission can do mission. And I think the big advantage for the local church or local rural church when it comes to food is that they have local eyes. They know these people. They know the farmers. They know the commercial farmers. They know the guy down the road that's got 200 acres of this, that, or the other. And that's one of the great advantages that they can bring into play, is to just kind of leverage those local eyes and the fact that farmer may very well be sitting in their church. And one of the unique things we found was we're on the edges of the metro, so I think that has a somewhat of a different impact than being more distant. But we found plenty of local missions that enjoyed receiving the beef. Okay, so we had not seen those folks before, and so that was good. And then I think another thing that rural churches have to do in particular, and I think this is a part of a kind of strengthening their self-identity, is to have a heart for the city. We grow the food out in the country, and I know there's some variations to that, but they're city recipients. And to take what they grow in the rural regions and make a relational contact with nonprofits and churches in the urban areas, it's a real blessing. And I just think it's a great partnership. So we distribute it in the city of Charlotte. We distribute it out in Cabarrus County, out in the rural reaches, but we go right downtown as well. And I've laughed about hauling frozen beef down the John Bell Freeway, in the back of my pickup truck. But hey, that's how you get it there.
I love the calling of a pastor. You never know what you're going to be doing. Everybody thinks about the preaching and the hospital visits, but they don't think about hauling beef down the highway. So you just never know. Well, Jaimie, what else have you seen other churches in our conference and in the surrounding area doing to support rural food systems?
Several examples within the conference come to mind, and then outside of it in the rest of North Carolina. My father's cows is the only beef producer I know, but there's a church outside of Hayesville, a farm called Stillwater's Landing that's been raising pigs, specifically pasture raised pigs, and like Bob, they have a very strong value of supporting food ministry efforts in the community. And yet at the same time, it posed a real opportunity to potentially earn income that could sustain the ministry and help it wean off of the grants that previously started and have supported the work, including our own grants. So they tithe about 50% of their pork produced, and the other 50% goes to brewery and restaurants in the Hayesville area. And, last I heard, they're doing fairly well. Much different from pork, there are several churches, especially since COVID-19 struck, that instead of producing vegetables or fruits themselves in small gardens, meaningful spaces and productive spaces, but really looking to serve more residents at scale because of the pandemic and the economic crisis it's brought. So there's churches that are purchasing higher volumes of produce from local farmers and either boxing it or using it to prep meals to deliver to school students, to deliver to families, to homebound seniors. A lot of these pantries or food ministries report, as high as a 400% increase in food-related household needs. So it's really incredible that of all times, churches are, really digging their heels in to the local ground, being able to both support families, which is kind of on mission with what they've always done, but also support farmers. There's some work in the eastern part of the state where churches have partnered with food aggregators or what we call food hubs. There are actually 8 food hubs across the state, which are doing their own work to source food from local farmers, bring it to a central facility, and then either sell it at a wholesale price, sell it retail directly to consumers through online or in-person markets, or, having kind of a philanthropic side and trying to give a portion of that food away through partner ministries. And then we have churches that are, really growing at scale. There's one in near Lumberton, actually, in Lillington, and another one in Ellerby, North Carolina, that both grow over 4 acres easily of produce for the purpose of either donating it or selling it.
Bob, what are some future plans that y'all have with My Father's Cows?
Well, one thing, I mean, we're definitely trying to expand our network. And I think the only thing that limits expanding our network is our own initiative. There's just so many potential recipients and people that we think we can partner with. One thing we're sort of discovering in the kind of the evolution or nature of developing we ourselves see ourselves as a nonprofit, and some of the funding issues, but some of the larger nonprofits in the urban areas would much prefer to buy cattle directly from farmers, and the price comes in lower. The product we bring, by cutting out all the processing in the middle and just from the farm, literally farm to table, not only does the price come down, but we retain the quality. And if you think about it, the blessing in that is we're bringing in measure the best product to some of the most needful folk. And as I've heard people describe, we're literally creating the king's table. And it gets into the dinner fellowship thing and just the opportunity to bring Christian witness. But some of the larger ones, if we can meet their scale of need and just literally try to help create contracts between local farmers and those major recipients, I think that will be a blessing. And again, the whole dinner church thing, and Luke, you and I, we've been talking about that. Churches have been closed down, and is there some way we can just encourage them to, at some point when the time is right, to start up again with their outreach and their dinner programs? And hey, how about a Hamburg cookout? Come this summer, something like that.
And Bob, how would a pastor or a layperson who's listening learn more about My Father's Cows? Maybe they want to know how you got started, or maybe they've got cattle farmers that are friends or church members. Maybe they're just curious about partnering with y'all. How would they learn more or get in touch with you?
Just go to our Facebook webpage, our Facebook page at My Father's Cows. The contact information is there. And I talked with someone this morning. We'll talk to any benevolent farmer in the state of North Carolina. We'll show up, and if their heart's in the right place, we'll make it happen.
That's awesome. Cool. Well, yeah, we'll link to that in the show notes. So
great.
Y'all can look for that. And Jaimie, so you gave some great ideas on churches that are connecting with farmers and growing food themselves and connecting with their rural food systems. How would a church get started with that? Say they're starting from scratch. What's the first step?
I love what Bob said earlier. How many resources are within the church alone? I think one critical first step is the church assessing, what assets do they have? And also what has traditionally been their lane? What have they been doing food wise? And then what's possible? What could they do differently? When they're assessing their assets, they might find, we have an underutilized commercial grade kitchen, or even just an underutilized small church kitchen, but a lot is possible in those spaces. Bob works with a pastor out of Robbinsville that's done an incredible canning program, and his youth have won state fair or county fair ribbons for the products that they've created in their really small church kitchen. Assets like that, or even land. There's an incredible amount of underutilized land owned by churches. And sometimes even within your congregation or outside of it, there's someone who's looking for land and really just needs that space to produce.
I've heard Bob talk about land for cattle too.
Oh man, totally agree. There's pasture out there. And we got to make connection there.
So if they've kind of assessed those assets, I think what's equally as important is thinking about the ministries they've been doing. What could be done differently? Are they really engaging people as authentically as they've hoped? Are they doing it with the least amount of harm and for the greatest good? I think is John Wesley. When they start thinking creatively, when they start involving both their congregation and the people they've traditionally served, there's kind of a new phrase I'm hearing in kind of the food bank and free food distribution world. Pantry participants are really the experts by experience. So engaging those experts, I think a church can go a long way, understanding what they can do more, how they can serve better.
And Jaimie, how would a church reach out to you to learn more, to engage with some of those resources that you mentioned earlier, the coaching, the grants? How would they get started with y'all?
Well, if it's possible to, link my email in your notes, I can provide that. You can find us at Resourceful Communities on Facebook or resourcefulcommunities.org. We do have small grants with a cycle coming up, a deadline of March 2nd for rural churches specifically that are trying to deepen their food ministries. So I'd really encourage you to reach out if you're interested, if you've been doing this work, if you're trying to work with local farm partners. We're especially excited to connect rural churches and some of these 8 food hubs across the state to increase purchasing partnerships between churches and food hubs to strengthen, and the rising tide that lifts all boats. So that's coming up, and I'd love for churches to reach out to me directly or my colleague, Justine.
Well, Bob, Jaimie, thank you so much for taking time out of your week to join us to tell us about rural food systems and the farmers and the friends that y'all have made, and just thanks for sharing your insights, your wisdom, and it's been a pleasure to talk to y'all.
My pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Means of Grace, a podcast produced by the Western North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church. We hope you enjoy listening to these podcasts and use them as a way to stay connected to our community. Remember to subscribe to Means of Grace for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Please leave us an honest rating and a review. It helps others find this podcast. Follow the WNCC on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at WNCC UMC. Once again, that's at WNCC UMC. Means of Grace is produced by the Western North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church and Andy Go of Gojo Studios.